My name is Malin, and I just finished watching Criminal Minds, and I spent 5 months watching this show and recording data for every single episode. I recorded various points, and I want to share the graphs and various data I've collected in this video. As a disclaimer, so I don't get copyright infringement, I do not own these characters, did not create these characters. They have nothing to do with the show. I'm using images for educational purposes, and I took the images myself, etc. Also, this video isn't going to be in two parts. I'm first going to do the characters, data I've collected about the characters, and then I'm going to switch to stuff about the crimes and the criminals and other just general observations. You don't really need to watch them in order. But anyway, let's get started. So for each character, I made a slide or a couple slides, depending on how much I had to do. But I recorded the episodes with plots about each character. And for all intents and purposes, a plot is anything that occurs in the opening, before the theme song, between the theme song and the catching of the criminal, and then finally occurs between the catching of the criminal and the end of the episode. So if it occurs in all of those three spots, then it's a plot. Before I start, if you see a title in yellow text, such as The Fisher King Part 1, that means that everyone was involved in the plot. It may or may not include Garcia, simply because she was at Quantico for most of the show, and then orange text means that 2 or 3 were involved. Blue highlight means that this character was a victim in that episode, and green highlight means that a loved one is a victim. So first for Elle, the average rating for her was 8.14, which is above most of the characters, but she was only in 28 episodes. She left in season 2, episode 6, because she went off the rails after shooting a rapist. She was the first character to end the season on a cliffhanger with a gun to her head in The Fisher King Part 1. She was a victim in Fisher King Part 2 because there was a whole she's gonna die, she's gonna live thing, and then she was a victim in Jareau and she was held hostage. All of her plots basically connect back to the Fisher King Part 2 when she gets shot. Then she goes off the rails and shoots the guy. Next we have Reid. Reid had the most plots with 38. He has 3 slides. He was a victim 10 times, and he had a loved one be a victim twice. He had the highest average rating with 8.24. He appeared in 313 episodes, and he never left the BAU except for when he was in prison. 2 of the 3 highest rated episodes involved Reid being a victim, and Reid has 2 babies named after him. He delivers a baby in season 9, episode 7, and Morgan's son's middle name is Spencer. Like I said, Reid has been a victim 10 times, starting with LDSK at the end. He and Koch are held hostage, and then he has some various plots about him. A couple of these are about him being close to potential killers or relating to them. And then we have, of course, Revelations, when he's abducted and tortured. Minimal Loss, he and Prentice are being held hostage by a cult. And then Amplification, he almost dies from anthrax. One thing I should probably mention is a lot of episodes immediately following the character being a victim, like Fear and Loathing, has to do with them trying to get past whatever just happened to them. So for Reid, Fear and Loathing, he has PTSD and contemplates doing drugs. And following with the drug plotline, it was kind of dropped, but after Revelations, Reid becomes addicted to drugs. In the episodes following, the only real sign that he's doing drugs is that Reid's sleeve is unbuttoned, and it's mostly seen throughout Honor Among Thieves, which is where this screenshot is from. You can't see his other arm in this photo, but his other arm had like a watch on it, and so it wasn't unbuttoned. It's mentioned a few times after he gets sober, but otherwise, Reid's doing drugs kind of got dropped. And continuing with the plots, we have Zugzwang. This is obviously when Reid tries to find his girlfriend Maeve, who was abducted, and she ultimately dies in that episode. The Replicator, we have the team almost blowing up. This one, I marked victim for all of them, except again Garcia, because the house they're in almost blows up, and they all narrowly escape. In Angels, Reid is badly shot, and in Entropy, Reid gets trapped by a hit woman. She does point a gun at him, which is why I did mark him as the victim. She did threaten him several times. And in the third slide, we have Spencer, where Reid gets arrested in Mexico for drugs and murder. He is a victim in this episode because he himself was drugged and framed, but because I always correlated the number of criminals to the crime that was committed, I did mark him as the criminal in this episode because he did have drugs on him. And the Reid prison episodes are the 7 episodes between Spencer and Green Light that had plots about Reid being in prison. They're all B plots, and so instead of counting each individually, I averaged the rating, which was 7.5, and that's what I marked. Once again, Reid's loved one is a victim when his mom was abducted in Red Light. Then a couple of seasons he has a break of not being a victim until season 14 when he was abducted by a cult in 300. And then at the end of that season, Reid and JJ are held hostage in Truth or Dare. And finally, the last episode, well, I should say this penultimate episode, Face Off, Reid blows up, and it ends with him fainting and having a nosebleed. And so I marked him as a victim in the final episode and in the end because he almost dies as a result of the explosion. I also did keep track of the 11 times actually, that Reid almost dies because it happened to him the most. He cannot catch a break. So we have gun to head, explosion / fire, anthrax, explosion, actually shot, grenade went off, gun to head, knife to throat, gun to head, and explosion, brain bleeding. Next we have Derek Morgan. His average rating was 7.84. He appeared in 251 episodes, starting from the pilot. He left because he had a baby towards the end of season 11, and 3 episodes from Illinois had plots about Morgan and took place in Chicago because that is where he's from. Morgan has 12 plots about him, and he's only a victim twice, and his loved one is also a victim twice. First is in the company when Morgan's cousin returns alive. This connects back to Big C when Morgan's cousin was first introduced as being missing, but she wasn't actually murdered by that killer. She was found alive in the company. And then in the replicator, as I said, with Reid, the team almost blows up. They escape narrowly. A couple of them are actually in a helicopter crash. Forget who though. And then Derek, it was Morgan's turn to be abducted and tortured. And finally, in a beautiful disaster, his last episode, Savannah, his wife, is shot by hit people and has a baby. Next, we have Emily Prentice. Her average rating was 7.94, which is pretty high compared to the other characters. She appeared in 194 episodes, and starting in season 2, episode 9, and after leaving at the end of season 7, she appears sporadically while working in London and finally returns after Haas leaves in season 12, and she stays through the end of the show. And although she was only marked as a victim 4 times, I know Prentice is often just straight up injured. She's shot, she's hit by a truck, etc. And after Haas, Prentice takes over his job as the chief unit leader, whatever it is. And as for plots, we have minimal loss when she and Reid are held hostage by a cult. Then I only marked Valhalla and Lauren, the 2-parter that have to do with Ian Doyle, the latter of which ends with her being, quote, killed. Then we have a couple episodes where she comes back and she leaves again, and then she comes back and then wheels up. Everyone's hit by a car, but Prentice is the one that's actually abducted. And then continuation of Prentice, she's not a victim anymore, but she does get fired briefly, and so there's a plot about that. In Saturday, she's being sued, and then the last episode about her is Frosty when she has relationship problems. So moving on to JJ, her average rating is 7.7. She has 21 plots about her. She's a victim 4 times, and her loved one, her husband Will, is a victim at the end of season 7. She appears in 289 episodes, starting from season 1, episode 2. She leaves at the start of season 6 to work elsewhere, returning in season 7. The number 289 is not the same number of episodes that the actress is credited in on IMDb. That's because I subtracted the episode she was gone from when she was on maternity in season 4 and 11. But the first time JJ is a victim is at the end of The Performer. Now this one's not a very big plot, but she was knocked out and there was no one there to help her or back her up, and so I did mark her as a victim for that. And then Risky Business is when they introduce her sister having committed suicide years earlier. Run is, as I said, Will is abducted, replicator team almost blows up, and 200, it's JJ's turn to be abducted and tortured. And then The Forever People, she has PTSD from that episode. And then in Truth or Dare, as I said with Reid and JJ are held hostage. And so JJ is gone for most of season 6 for another government job, and it's not until she's abducted in 200 that the reason and trauma is revealed. She often works alongside Reid, they're close friends. I noticed that unless in a very serious conversation, no one calls her Jennifer, not even her parents or her sister or Will. I just thought that was interesting. I guess it's a nickname. Okay, so next we have Jason Gideon. His average rating was 7.82. He appeared in 47 episodes, starting from the pilot as the main character, but he left in season 3, episode 2. And although the actor did not appear, Gideon was murdered in season 10, episode 13. So he had 5 plots about him. He was the victim once in Nelson Sparrow when he was murdered, and his loved one was a victim once in No Way Out, Part 2, The Evolution of Frank. I if I remember correctly, this was a while ago, it was his girlfriend that got murdered. Most workplace shows start with a character's first day, and in Criminal Minds, it was Gideon's first day back after being blown up. Well, not blown up. He was in an explosion, and a lot of other people died, but he didn't. And that same bomber came back in Won't Get Fooled Again, which was the 3rd episode. Next, we have David Rossi. His average rating was 7.58. He had 20 plots about him, and he was a victim twice. His loved one was never a victim, although his wife, Crystal, was briefly taken hostage, but I didn't mark that on any graphs. He appears in 274 episodes, starting just after Gideon left in season 3, episode 6. And in season 10, he learns he has an adult daughter, and after that, most of his plots are about his family. And so the first time he is a victim is in the replicator, which mentioned several times now. Team blows up. Rossi was the last one inside, so he was the one in the most danger at that point. And in Fate, he learns he has a daughter, and then most of his plots are about his family. In Last Gasp, everyone's transferred to different departments, and Rossi is put into retirement. And Chameleon, when they introduce Everett Lynch, Rossi's almost killed by him, but Lynch ultimately chooses not to kill him. And unlike most other characters, Rossi was never the cliffhanger that ended an episode or a season. And additionally, other than the replicator where everyone was last victim, Rossi was only the last victim once in Chameleon. Next, we have Garcia with the lowest average rating of 7.44. She had 17 plots about her and is the victim twice. And Garcia does not appear in every episode, but she starts in the pilot. She misses a handful. I do not know how many she missed, though, because I didn't keep track of that. And because she does not go in cases, most of the plots about the entire team do not include her because she was at Quantico. Penelope was the episode where she is a victim first when she is shot in an attempted murder. And Hanley Waters was one of the episodes that is everyone and includes Garcia. I forgot to say this earlier, but as the team talks about the feeling about Prentice's quote death, because she later comes back. And in Last Gasp, everyone is transferred to different departments. Garcia is put into, I forget exactly what the job was. It is something with computers, but it is not the BAU. Then in 300, Reid and Garcia are abducted by a cult. And in Saturday, Garcia actually leads a case of her own with JJ, Alvez, and Lewis. Next, we have Aaron Hotchner. His average rating was 8.06. He had 13 plots about him. He was a victim 5 times. His loved one was a victim once. Hotch appears in 257 episodes, starting pilot until just after season 2. In season 1, he has a baby and later gets divorced. In 100, his wife is murdered, and he obviously gets custody of Jack. Hotch has a lot of tragedy in his life because he is also often a victim. First being one with Reid, where they're held hostage. Then in Mayhem, he explodes and his FBI friend dies. In Omnivore, they introduced George Foyet, who was an old case of his. In Faceless Nameless, Hotch is stabbed by Foyet. In 100, Hotch's wife is killed by him, and then in turn, Hotch kills Foyet. And of course, you have the episode with the aftermath of that. Then in Route 66, Foyet comes back when Hotch is in the hospital. He imagines him and his wife. And finally, in Mr. Scratch, Hotch is trapped and drugged and imagines that everyone else dies. And that was the episode that introduced Mr. Scratch, who also comes back later. And after Gideon, the 10 main character left, Hotch became like the leader of the BAU, and he also takes over with a majority of the opening and closing quotes that Gideon previously did. And in season 12, Hotch left because his family was threatened. He left abruptly with no explanation for a few episodes, until a few episodes later when it was revealed he was in witness protection. Next, Alex Blake. She's the first one, aside from like the longest lasting cast. Her average rating was 7.83. She has 4 plots about her and is the victim twice, obviously the replicator. And then in Blood Relations, this is like with the episode with JJ where she was tackled by the killer and almost drowned, but there was just no one else around to like save her. So she got marked as a victim for that episode, and she appears in 48 overall in only seasons 8 and 9. There's Kate Callahan, who an average rating was 7.8 from the one episode where her niece and her niece's friend are abducted. She appears in just 23 episodes, so she is the main character that had the lowest episode count. From the start of season 10, the plot with her niece being abducted was starting to be set up. Continuing, next, Tara Lewis had an average rating of 7.8 as well, but she had 6 episodes about her. Her loved one is a victim once, and she appears in 91 episodes overall, starting in season 11. The episode where her loved one's victim is Mirror Image, when her brother is abducted by Mr. Scratch. And in Saturday, when everyone has their own plot, Lewis works on a case with Garcia. Okay, that should not say 6, that should say 5 episodes about her. I'm not missing one. Next, Luke Alvez. He first appears in season 12 and appears in 69 episodes overall. He has 7 plots about him and is a victim once. So you have the 3 that everyone was in, and then you've Bad Moon on the Rise and Luke, which is both just about him, first being about his new girlfriend, and Luke being about a criminal that is, I guess, kind of going after him. He's never directly targeted, but his friend is killed. And then in Ghost, Alvez and Simmons are abducted. Next, we have Matt Simmons. Average rating was 7.62, 6 plots about him, and he was a victim in Ghost as well, and his loved one was a victim in X Part, when his wife is a hostage. Simmons appears in 47 episodes starting in season 13, although he does have 2 previous appearances as a member of the International Response Team, which was one of the spin-offs. Most episodes about him involve his wife and 4 or 5 kids. And then one slide just about Jordan Todd, Ashley Seaver, and Stephen Walker. These characters appeared for less than 1 season, which is why they don't have their own slide. Todd replaced JJ the first time she went on maternity leave in season 4. Seaver replaced JJ when she left during season 6, and Walker was brought in to find Scratch in season 12 and was ultimately killed by him. Walker was the only one with a plot about him when his friend was being poisoned. And so, as you may have noticed, a lot of characters get abducted and tortured, starting with Reid by Tobias Henkel in Revelations, then Prentice, who is held hostage with Reid. Reid is unharmed in this episode by the Liberty Church cult in Minimal Loss. JJ is abducted with Mateo Cruz. I believe it was by terrorists, or people who are at least in connection to terrorists, in the episode 200. Morgan was abducted by quite a few people in Derek and tortured. And Prentice was abducted by Mr. Scratch and psychologically tortured in Wheels Up. And then Reid was again abducted with Garcia, who was unharmed by a cult. Same cult as the second bullet point. That episode was 300. Okay, the graph isn't loading on my slideshow, but this is just showing or visualizing the number of character plots. So the yellow slice is just plots about their personal lives, and the average rating, I don't have the average rating for that, but the average rating for this entire section of the pie chart, which is just a little over half, is 7.84, which is above the average rating for any episode. The episodes for where the character is a victim, there are 36 of those with an average rating of 7.89. And the episodes where a character's loved one is a victim, there's only 10 of those, but has a much higher rating of 8.13. And finally, there are just 151 episodes that don't have any plots about a character. And finally, something I observed was as I explained, all the titles in orange signified the plot involved 2 to 3 characters, and there are 8 of those total, and the first 7 all involved Reid, usually Reid and JJ or Reid and Prentice, but then there was the episode Ghost when Alvez and Simmons got abducted. This is the end of part 1, explaining all the characters. I'm going to put a link to part 2, so if you want to see information about the crimes committed and other general observations about the show, watch that part.